Hey, this is Mikko, and this is about the perfect brush for digital painting. It doesn't really matter if you're using Procreate or Photoshop. I think this is the stuff that I have learned on Photoshop, but I'm now using this information to make more paintings on Procreate. My own attitude towards brushes has changed quite drastically over the past 5 years, and it has just changed my productivity like really much. I mean, before I did 10 times less paintings than I do now, and I just wanted to share some of my own experiences if this might help some of you out there too, especially if you're struggling with the fact that you have tons of brushes in your library and they don't really help you at all. Okay, so I wanted to tell you about my own experience on Photoshop, because I used to work only on Photoshop, and over the years I created this massive library of brushes and I was using them for all of my paintings. And then this massive update for Photoshop happened, and they kind of messed up the way that the brushes are categorized, and I sort of lost that whole set of brushes, and just out of convenience I ended up using only one brush, which is the round brush for Photoshop. And I know it's very basic, but when the update was kind of rolled back a year later and I could find my old tools again in the same way that I did before, I noticed that I was painting so much more paintings and everything was just coming together in a much more organic way that felt more natural to me, that I kind of let go of all of those tools that I had created over the years. It was a lot of work to create my own brush set for Photoshop, but in the end I noticed that it wasn't really helping me be more productive, and I think that was always the end goal. Especially when I was creating art for video games, I wanted to be able to produce as much art as possible in the shortest amount possible, and when I noticed that this brush set wasn't doing it for me, I let go of basically the whole thing. So now when I'm working with Procreate, and for example for this painting, I'm painting the entire image with a single brush that I have created. I don't even open the brushes palette even once during the production of this painting. I just change the size and opacity a little bit. Mostly I paint with 100% opacity. That is because this brush allows for kind of slight opacity variety by just pressing lightly on the screen. So opacity is kind of not necessary, and I kind of like the look of hard opacity brushes. It makes you make more kind of drastic decisions. Nothing is kind of gray. The brushstroke is either there or it isn't. It's more simple for me then to evaluate if it should be in the picture or not. One of the things that I used to defend for myself for using so many brushes is that painting, for example, foliage or clouds or rock textures takes a lot of time. But I have these large-scale prints in my home, and when I look at them, I'm really happy that I didn't use any stamp-like brushes to create them, because when I see the brush stamp pattern in my painting, especially when it's hanging on my wall at home and I'm sleeping on the bed and I can see the stamp pattern, it just drives me crazy. There's something about that just rubs me the wrong way. I guess it's the fact that if anybody else used that same kind of stamp in their own painting, it would look like exactly the same as in my painting, and that somehow makes me feel not needed as an artist. And having more kind of like this organic look when you have to paint everything by hand, I just like the end result. Like, this is just personally me, but I like that end result more. So basically one of the reasons why I like to paint this way is that I'm super OCD. But I would also say that still my painting these days is way faster, because when I did those kind of stamp brushes in a painting, then I looked at it and I had to go over all the details by hand anyway, so it wasn't helping me be any quicker. I just had to paint everything twice, and that's not helpful. So what features should you look for when you are creating your own brushes? Well, I have just few things that I look for in a brush. the way that these settings work, like that takes time, and that's why for me creating brushes takes a lot of time. Like for example, this brush that I'm using in this painting called Mikko Rule, I have developed this brush over dozens of paintings basically, and only when I notice that I don't need to go to the settings and change anything anymore, then it's done. When I know that I can make full paintings with this without opening the brush palette. So the features that I look for is a little bit of size variety based on the pressure applied. Also, the texture should have character, but it should also allow for all kinds of detail in every part of the image. For this specific brush, I have this like element of chaos, that not all parts of the canvas can be painted with the same amount of applied pressure, that sometimes it requires more and sometimes it requires less, and that creates this kind of like imperfect line and chaos that I just love, because I love the fact that it forces me not to get too precious with any part of the painting. Also, when like adding texture to a brush, and in Procreate the texture is called grain, when adding grain to a brush, I want that grain to be not visible and recognizable when, for example, if you have just black brush and you paint over a white screen, like you shouldn't have a repeating pattern, so you can set it to start at different parts of the image. Just having too much personality in the texture is a bad thing, but having too little can look monotonous. So it's a fine balance. So finding those right textures is really the key for a good brush like this. One thing with a good grain texture to me also is the fact that there are these kind of like mid-gray level parts in the grain. What that does is when I zoom in on the brush stroke, when I want to color pick in-between color between the background and the brush stroke, the gray parts in the grain allow for this kind of in-between colors to appear, and then I can color pick those and use them in the painting without going into the color palette. And in Procreate there is the streamline option, and for a painting like this it's all about speed, so the streamline is basically turned off. That just helps all the brushstrokes render in real time, and I don't have to wait for them to happen, and it just helps the whole process go by really quickly. I know that this might be a very weird way of painting for some people, but having this attitude towards using as little brushes in a single painting as possible, it has kind of freed up this mental clutter in the painting process, when the thought of like what brush I'm using doesn't even enter my mind. I'm just focused on the color, line rhythm, values, lighting and mood, all the basic stuff that actually create visual impact. I'm not thinking about if this tool is the right thing to use for this part of the painting. Then I don't even have to let my mind go there. I can just focus on the more important parts of the painting and work on those. It's the lack of that extra thought in the process that has helped me paint so much quicker than I used to before. And it has helped me let go of some of this like fuzziness and perfectionism that is not really helping anyone, and it's especially not helping you to be quicker and more productive. So if you're the type of brush hoarder who has 50 brushes in your constant use palette, maybe just try looking at them and seeing that, do you have brushes that can be used for the entire painting at once? And if you have such a brush, maybe you can start using it and do small tweaks and adjustments to the way the brush behaves so that it fits your own painting style. When you have reached a level that you don't even need to open the settings anymore and you can just paint the picture from start to finish with the same brush, then you know that you have created something that is truly yours. And it's an expression of how you paint, and it will help you paint faster, and you don't have to be a hoarder basically. Okay, I hope this has been helpful to you, and if you have any thoughts on process, let me know in the comments below. Please remember to subscribe and hit the bell button, and I will see all of you in the next video. I'm Mikko, and it has been a pleasure to talk about this process with you. Okay, bye!